ethics last time, and we're going to look at the intersection between ethics and marketing research with a video here in a minute. And we're going to start by talking about the scientific side of marketing. And it's the part of marketing that students generally don't like, because marketing is both an art, it's creative in terms of executing ads, developing campaigns, things like that. It's enormously creative and artistic, but it's also a science. And the reason that most students don't like it, although we won't have a lot of math in here, is that when you get to marketing research, if you pursue a degree in marketing, and in any of your substantive fields in the college business, you're going to have to take a research course. You have to take a statistics course. And the reason students don't like it is because it involves math, and math is what? Hard. Right? Statistics is hard, and math is hard. So, but it's an important part because the success of a company is largely going to be predicated on whether or not they engage in good marketing research and are able to figure out what it is that people want or need. And so that is becoming increasingly easier in a highly sophisticated, technologically advanced world. So what does the scientific method start with? If you Google scientific method, what does it say? And what does your text say it starts with? Somebody says, that if you Google it, a lot of them say it says the formulation of a question. And I think that that's wrong. It does begin with an observation. So we're going to have to look out there and see what it is. So Henry Ford, for example, there's a story about how Henry Ford saw his first automobile, and he suddenly realized, based on this observation, that this might be a better method of transportation for the masses than the horse. So we're going to observe. We're going to go out there and look. So we begin with an observation. Now, what is it that we're going to observe? As marketers, what are we going to observe?
How it affects society.
How it affects society. What else are we going to observe?
What people want.
What people want. And how we can fulfill that want or need. Right? So we're going to begin with these observations. What is it that consumers want? Based on that, we're going to formulate a question, right? And this corresponds roughly to step one of the process that's outlined in your textbook. So we're going to define the problem. We notice that there's a need. We're going to define the problem and see how we can fulfill that need. At this point, we're going to start setting objectives and identifying possible marketing actions that we can get. So what is it that we do when we set objectives in research? We're going to figure out how we're going to go about fulfilling that want or need, right? So set the objectives and start identifying possible marketing action. Then we're going to look at background research. If you become an academic, this is what you call the literature review section of your study. Go out there and see what's already known in the world, right? Do the literature review, see what's already out there. Developing the research plan, setting constraints. What are some of the constraints that companies face in engaging in market research? Should we always engage in marketing research? Or should companies forego marketing research? If you don't have the budget, you might want to forego the marketing research if you're just in survival mode. So setting the budget. What can we know? What kinds of methods are there out there? And from that, we're going to develop a hypothesis. So we want to test whether or not the product that we notice that people want, so let's say that we noticed out there's a need for widgets, right? How big is the need for widgets? How are we going to find that out? Now, in science, a lot of times, and we will see in here, we'll watch a video where in marketing there is some experimental research, but usually this is done not through experimental research, but through survey research. We're going to go out. And so we collect all kinds of survey data from people. So what kinds of data can we collect? There are different ways that we can classify data. What are the different ways that we can, according to your text, classify data as? Look at page for those of you who have your textbooks, the types of data, step 3 on page 196 and 197. So what kinds of data can we get? What kinds of data is out there? What kinds of data is readily available that we can look at maybe? Secondary data. A lot of times we're going to start with secondary data. Now what's nice about secondary data? There's two types of secondary data. So within that field we can classify it as internal and external. Now a lot of times the external is particularly helpful in providing observational data that we can look at. Things like Census Bureau. What's wonderful about that? Somebody else has collected it for you and you can get it really cheaply. The Census Bureau collects all kinds of data. How many of you participated in the last census? Most of you should be raising your hands. The rest of you live under bridges and you attempted to avoid the census collection data. You can find out all kinds of things. So let's suppose, for example, we want to open a restaurant and we're looking for places to open a restaurant. What kind of census or secondary data can we find out about places like Edmond? Lots of restaurant chains, for example, Outback, start with just basically looking at census data. And what do we know, for example, from the census data about Edmond? What do we know that's already collected? We know the population. So a lot of restaurant chains, when they look at this and they start engaging their market research for where they're going to go, where they're going to locate, Outback has a minimum population. Guthrie is not going to be even in the running, right? Because what's the population of Guthrie? It's about 10,000 people. What's the population of Edmond? It's about 90,000 people. So they got an Outback here in Edmond. We didn't get an Outback in Guthrie. They look for that basic level of population growth. Then what can we find out from the census data as well?
Median.
The median income, right? And this is what we call a measure of central tendency. And it's one of those that's useful. So what are the measures of central tendency? For those of you should have had statistics. How many of you have had your business statistics course? All right. So what are the measures of central tendency that we can look at? Why do we look at things like median income? What are the measures of central tendency? Okay, mean, right? Which is the statistical average, right? It's the sum, mu equals the sum of xi over n, I equals 1 to the nth. You know how to do that. Just take all of the cases and add them up. This is the average. The median, and in stats, this is the one that we usually look at. The median tells us what? That's the mean. What's the median?
Smack in the middle.
It's back, yeah, it's right down, smack down in the middle. And maybe when we look at this secondary data, as we begin to formulate our research, the median might be a more useful figure. And the Census Bureau calculates this. They give you the median household income, for example, for Edmond, Oklahoma. And you know, based on that median, that half of the salaries are above that and half are below it. Why might this be a useful figure? Well, if you're looking at averages, let's suppose, for example, that Bill Gates walks into a homeless shelter where 3 nuns are feeding 37 homeless people. What's the mean net worth in the room? It's about $1 billion. But it's still 37 homeless people, 3 nuns, and Bill Gates. Right? So median might be a more beneficial statistic in that because the median is going to be really, really low. And then you have mode, which is the most frequently occurring. From these numbers, you can calculate things like standard deviation. And when we think about predicting, and in marketing, one of the things that we do in marketing research, if you take logistics, is we figure out and we're able to do research on just-in-time inventory control. And so you're going to look at things like standard deviation, which is called a measure of dispersion. It tells you how different a data set is, how different a set of numbers are, how widely dispersed they are. So there are two measures of dispersion. There's the variance and the standard deviation. This formula is the standard deviation xi minus the mu squared I equals 1 to the n over n. Now this is the standard deviation. This is the lowercase letter sigma for a population. We usually don't see standard deviations given for population. And when we look at our survey data, for example, one of the things that we might start looking at is standard deviations for this part of the formula, by the way, is called the variance. We start looking at standard deviations for the sample, which is sigma xi minus x bar squared over n minus 1. You lose 1 degree of freedom for a survey. And that's what we're going to see a lot of in marketing research, a lot of survey research, where we look at a subset of a population or a sample of the population and look at the data. So secondary data. So we've got internal, which can be things like, stuff that's produced by our accounting department, sales figures, and external things that are like the Census Bureau. Now, secondary data may not be terribly helpful after we get this general idea and knowing whether or not there really is a need, so for example, for an Outback. So we might want to go into primary data, where we actually go out and collect surveys and see what the need is. And there's all kinds of primary, so we can further divide data up into two types with regard to primary data. We can have qualitative data, and this is part of our research design, and thinking about our research design. We can have qualitative data, and we can have quantitative data. What's qualitative data? What kinds of data can we get qualitative in marketing research? Sorry, what? That might be quantitative data. We can ask people if they recognize, for example, brand names. That's one of the things that we'll do in research. We can do things like focus groups, in-depth interviews, ethnographic studies. And there's a whole book called Ethnography for Marketers, where they tell you how to go out and actually watch people and observe them in their natural habitat, how they're using things. So for example, Apple comes out with the iPad, and one of the interesting things that's interesting about Apple's iPad that people don't realize is that it's used a lot in business now, but was that what Apple intended it to be used for? And an ethnographer could tell you this. What did Apple intend the iPad to be? Entertainment. And it's being used in business. Why? It's cool. And business executives thought it was cool. So it's being used for a purpose that it wasn't initially intended for. And is it actually all that useful as a business tool? You think it is? Why do you think it's useful as a business tool? Yeah, but Microsoft Office and PowerPoint are hard to do on that, aren't they? It doesn't have a keyboard. You can get a keyboard, although Apple didn't make it because Steve Jobs didn't want you to have a keyboard. Steve Jobs wanted you to have it. He didn't even like cases for cell phones. What?
Just an keyboard. It's like $108.
Okay. One of the things that was interesting, Steve Jobs, now that he's dead, Apple is an example of a company that was not terribly research driven. They didn't do a lot of research because Steve Jobs' attitude was, you don't know what you want. I'm going to tell you what you want. And he said things like, there will never be a smaller iPad. You have to have that size screen in order to enjoy the graphics and things like that on it. And what happened the minute he died? What did they come out with? The iPad mini. Right? In a different size, because not everybody wanted that huge thing. Some people wanted a smaller device that you can carry around. So you can do focus groups, in-depth in-depth questionnaires, and observational data, ethnography, seeing how people actually work it. Now, what's the nice thing about qualitative data? It can give you a lot of really rich observations and ideas about things, but it may be difficult then to transfer that into a general theory, right? To say this, if you notice that one person likes it, doesn't mean that you can generalize that. That's using anecdotal, for example, evidence to the general population. So quantitative data can give you less detailed or less rich data in many instances, but it's oftentimes more easily generalizable to a greater or larger population. So we can further classify data as being either qualitative or quantitative, and citing these methodologies and these techniques is not something that's trivial. So then we collect the data, which is step 3, analyze our data, draw conclusions. We can determine whether or not an Outback is likely to be successful, and then you should take marketing action based on that information. Right? The purpose of this is not to develop really nice reports and then shove them in the drawer and do nothing with them. So you want to report the data and use it to take marketing action based on that kind of information, developing a marketing plan. We talk about marketing strategies. Now, in this environment, it's become enormously easy. One of the things that happened in the past is a lot of businesses assumed that they could not afford to engage in marketing research, and so they didn't engage in marketing research, and many businesses failed. In a technologically advanced society, we now have the ability to go out and engage in a lot of marketing research fairly cheaply and determine what people want. And I suggest that even businesses that are small businesses, in my own business, we do this all the time. We constantly look at things like, for example, I own 4 bed and breakfasts, and we look at things like TripAdvisor and our ratings on TripAdvisor, and that provides us with a lot of qualitatively rich data that we can look at. But some of this is becoming scary, and this is where the intersection between ethics and marketing research provides an interesting example. This is Dr. Akisti. He is a information scientist and was concerned about privacy. And so I think it's an interesting example of how far marketing research has come and what we can do with it. And in some ways, how scary it is. So watch this.
I would like to tell you a story connecting the notorious privacy incident involving Adam and Eve and the remarkable shift in the boundaries between public and private, which has occurred in the past 10 years. You know the incident. Adam and Eve, one day in the Garden of Eden, realize they are naked, they freak out, and the rest is history. Nowadays, Adam and Eve would probably act differently. We do reveal so much more information about ourselves online than ever before. And so much information about us is being collected by organizations. Now, there is much to gain and benefit from this massive analysis of personal information or big data. But there are also complex trade-offs that come from giving away our privacy. And my story is about these trade-offs. I will start with an observation, which in my mind has become clearer and clearer in the past few years, that any personal information can become sensitive information. Back in the year 2000, 100 billion photos were shot worldwide, but only a minuscule proportion of them were actually uploaded online. In 2010, only on Facebook, in a single month, 2.5 billion photos were uploaded, most of them identified. In the same span of time, computers' ability to recognize people in photos improved by 3 orders of magnitude. What happens when you combine these technologies together? Increasing availability of facial data, improving facial recognizing ability by computers, but also cloud computing, which gives anyone in this theater the kind of computational power which a few years ago was only the domain of 3-letter agencies. And ubiquitous computing, which allows my phone, which is not a supercomputer, to connect to the internet and do there hundreds of thousands of face matches in a few seconds. Well, we conjecture the result of this combination of technologies will be a radical change in our very notions of privacy and anonymity. To test that, we did an experiment on Carnegie Mellon University campus. We asked students who were walking by to participate in a study. And we took a shot with a webcam, and we asked them to fill out a survey on a laptop. While they were filling out the survey, we uploaded their shot to a cloud computing cluster. And we started using a facial recognizer to match that shot to a database of some hundreds of thousands of images which we had downloaded from Facebook profiles. By the time the subject reached the last page on the survey, the page had been dynamically updated with the 10 best matching photos which the recognizer had found. And we asked the subjects to indicate whether he or she found themselves in the photo. You see the subject? Well, the computer did, and in fact did so for 1 out of 3 subjects. So essentially, we can start from an anonymous face, offline or online, and we can use facial recognition to give a name to that anonymous face, thanks to social media data. But a few years back, we did something else. We started from social media data, we combined it statistically with data from US government social security, and we ended up predicting social security numbers, which in the United States are extremely sensitive information. Do you see where I'm going with this? So if you combine the 2 studies together, then the question becomes, can you start from a face? And using facial recognition, find a name and publicly available information about that name and that person. And from that publicly available information, infer non-publicly available information, much more sensitive ones, which you link back to the face. And the answer is yes, we can, and we did. Of course, the accuracy keeps getting worse. But in fact, we even decided to develop an iPhone app, which uses the phone internal camera to take a shot of a subject and then upload it to a cloud and then do what I just described to you in real time. Looking for a match, finding public information, trying to infer sensitive information, and then sending it back to the phone so that it is overlaid on the face of the subject. An example of augmented reality, probably a creepy example of augmented reality. In fact, we didn't develop the app to make it available, just as a proof of concept. In fact, take these technologies and push them to their logical extreme. Imagine a future in which strangers around you will look at you through their Google glasses or one day their contact lenses and use 7 or 8 data points about you to infer anything else which may be known about you. What will this future without secrets look like? And should we care? We may like to believe that the future with so much wealth of data will be a future with no more biases. But in fact, having so much information doesn't mean that we will make decisions which are more objective. In another experiment, we presented to our subjects information about a potential job candidate. We included in this information some references to some funny, absolutely legal, but perhaps slightly embarrassing information that the subject had posted online. Now, interestingly, among our subjects, some had posted comparable information, and some had not. Which group do you think was more likely to judge harshly our subject? Paradoxically, it was the group who had posted similar information, an example of moral dissonance. Now, you may be thinking, this does not apply to me because I have nothing to hide. But in fact, privacy is not about having something negative to hide. Imagine that you are the HR director of a certain organization and you receive resumes and you decide to find more information about the candidates. Therefore, you Google their names and in a certain universe you find this information. Or in a parallel universe, you find this information. Do you think that you will be equally likely to call either candidate for an interview? If you think so, then you are not like the US employers who are in fact part of our experiment. Meaning we did exactly that. We created Facebook profiles manipulating trades, and then we started sending out resumes to companies in the US. And we monitor whether they were searching for our candidates and whether they were reacting to the information they were finding on social media. And aware, discrimination was happening through social media for equally skilled candidates. Now, marketers like us to believe that all information about us will always be used in a manner which is in our favor. But think again, why should that be always the case? In a movie which came out a few years ago, Minority Report, a famous scene had Tom Cruise walk in a mall and holographic, personalized advertising would appear around it. Now, the movie is set in 2054, about 40 years from now, and as exciting as the technology looks, it already vastly underestimates the amount of information that the organization can gather about you, and now they can use it to influence you in a way that you will not even detect. So, as an example, this is another experiment actually we are running, not yet completed. Imagine that an organization has access to your list of Facebook friends, and through some kind of algorithm, they can detect the two friends that you like the most. And then they create, in real time, a facial composite of these two friends. Now, studies prior to ours have shown that people don't recognize any longer, even themselves, in facial composites, but they react to those composites in a positive manner. So next time you are looking for a certain product and there is an ad suggesting you to buy it, it will not be just a standard spokesperson. It will be one of your friends. And you will not even know that this is happening. Now, the problem is that the current policy mechanisms we have to protect ourselves from the abusers of personal information are like bringing a knife to a gunfight. One of these mechanisms is transparency, telling people what you're going to do with their data. And in principle, that's a very good thing. It's necessary, but it is not sufficient. Transparency can be misdirected. You can tell people what you're going to do, and then you still nudge them to disclose arbitrary amounts of personal information. So in yet another experiment, this one with students, we asked them to provide information about their campus behavior, including pretty sensitive questions, such as this one. Now, to one group of subjects, we told them, only other students will see your answers. To another group of subjects, we told them students and faculty will see your answers. Transparency, notification, and sure enough, this worked, in the sense the first group of subjects were much more likely to disclose than the second. It makes sense, right? But then we added the misdirection. We repeated the experiment with the same group, this time adding a delay between the time we told subjects how we will use their data and the time we actually started answering the questions. How long a delay do you think we had to add in order to nullify the inhibitory effect of knowing that faculty will see your answers? 10 minutes? 5 minutes? 1 minute? How about 15 seconds? 15 seconds were sufficient to have the two groups disclose the same amount of information, as if the second group now no longer care for faculty reading their answers. Now, I have to admit that these talks so far may sound exceedingly gloomy, but this is not my point. In fact, I want to share with you the fact that there are alternatives. The way we are doing things now is not the only way they can be done, and certainly not the best way they can be done. When someone tells you people don't care about privacy, consider whether the game has been designed and rigged so that they cannot care about privacy. And coming to the realization that these manipulations occur is already halfway through the process of being able to protect yourself. When someone tells you that privacy is incompatible with the benefits of big data, consider that in the last 20 years, researchers have created technologies to allow virtually any electronic transactions to take place in a more privacy-preserving manner. We can browse the internet anonymously. We can send emails that can only be read by the intended recipient, not even the NSA. We can have even privacy-preserving data mining. In other words, we can have the benefits of big data while protecting privacy. Of course, these technologies imply a shifting of costs and revenues between data holders and data subjects, which is why perhaps you don't hear more about them. Which brings me back to the Garden of Eden. There is a second privacy interpretation of the story of the Garden of Eden, which doesn't have to do with the issue of Adam and Eve feeling naked and feeling ashamed. You can find echoes of this interpretation in John Milton's Paradise Lost. In the garden, Adam and Eve are materially content. They're happy, they're satisfied. However, they also lack knowledge and self-awareness. The moment they eat the aptly named fruit of knowledge, that's when they discover themselves. They become aware. They achieve autonomy. The price to pay, however, is leaving the garden. So privacy, in a way, is both the means and the price to pay for freedom. Again, marketers tell us that big data and social media are not just a paradise of profit for them, but a Garden of Eden for the rest of us. We get free content, we get to play Angry Birds, we get targeted ads. But in fact, in a few years, organizations will know so much about us that we'll be able to infer our desires before we even form them, and perhaps buy products on our behalf before we even know we need them. Now, there was one English author who anticipated this kind of future where we would trade away our autonomy and freedom for comfort. Even more so than George Orwell, the author is, of course, Aldous Huxley. In Brave New World, imagine a society where technologies that we created originally for freedom end up coercing us. However, in the book, he also offers us a way out of that society, similar to the path that Adam and Eve had to follow to leave the garden. In the words of the savage, regaining autonomy and freedom is possible, although the price to pay is steep. So, I do believe that one of the defining fights of our times will be the fight for the control over personal information. The fight over whether big data will become a force for freedom rather than a force which will hiddenly manipulate us. Right now, many of us do not even know that the fight is going on, but it is, whether you like it or not. And at the risk of playing the serpent, I will tell you that the tools for the fight are here, the awareness of what is going on, in your hands, just a few clicks away. Thank you.
So, we might want to, for example, engage in market research and figure out whether our ads are working. And in the past, it was very difficult to determine what the ROI on an ad was, whether or not we were getting good value for our money. In the modern world, as a result of this availability of big data, we can pinpoint these ads and determine ROI with much more efficiency. And I'll show you, if I can find it, an example from my own business that uses Facebook. So there's a company that partners with Facebook. And in order to get it, I had to create my own video. I hope that's still here. company contacted us about targeting our ads more specifically to get a better ROI. And they did this PowerPoint presentation with us, which I actually captured using something called a video screen capture program, because they had locked down the browser so that you couldn't take screenshots of it. So why is Facebook free? And why is the company worth over $200 million? And how can we use marketing research to use the power of Facebook to target ads? I think it's interesting. It's actually the largest data mining company in the world, and even if you don't have a Facebook account, they're still collecting data on you that they can then use to sell to companies to target you with very specific types of econometric metrics and econometric type programs to predict your willingness to buy or be receptive to the marketing ads that we create. So they know everything about you when you create a Facebook, even if you don't create a Facebook account. All of this stuff is sent to Facebook. If you have rewards cards, how many of you have a Homeland rewards card or a CVS card? They get all of that data. When you apply for mortgages and things like that, they know that, which gives them data on your income. All public records are tracked by Facebook and uploaded to their website. The average individual, even if you do not have a Facebook site, Facebook has 75,000 data points on you, even if you don't have a Facebook account. 75,000 data points. Isn't that amazing? They know what kind of car you drive, where you live, what property you own. And all of these things can be used to build highly complex models, structural equation models, to determine whether or not you will be willing to buy or purchase something. And to build targeted ads. So when you log on to your Facebook account, how many of you have Facebook? You notice that there's ads on the sides that are specifically tailored to you. When I got a divorce, I started getting all of these ads because I listed on Facebook that I'm Jewish, and I went from being married to single. I started getting all these ads for Jewish single dating sites popping up. When I said I was in a relationship, I started getting all of these ads for equine stuff because I have horses on my pictures on my Facebook site. And I said that I was interested in horses, and I've shown. So it's an enormously effective marketing tool where we can use marketing research to really drill down and figure out what it is that people want and how they will use it, and whether or not they're going to be impacted by our marketing message. And as I said in the past, when we used to engage in advertising, a lot of it you had no idea whether or not you were really getting a good ROI. It may have been very indirect measures. It's now, as a result of this sophisticated marketing research, we have the ability to really tell whether or not our marketing is doing an effective job. And I think that it's one of those things that, as Dr. Akisti points out, can also be somewhat creepy. Even if you don't think you have something to hide, whether or not we're nudging you to respond to certain marketing ads may be very, very ethically problematic. One of the things that we probably think about. All right, so on Tuesday, we have an exam, and I'm sure you want to know what's on the exam. If you want, you can bring your devices up here and record. You're always welcome to record what I have to say anytime you want. Of course, I have the video recorder going as well. This is the exam. I took it myself this morning. I made 100 on it, so we know that it's fair and balanced, just like Fox News. And I'll give you an opportunity to bring your stuff up here and set it. And I'll try not to walk around like I normally do so you can get a good recording, and I will just go through question by question and tell you what you should know for the exam. Anybody else want to bring their device up here? Give you a couple of minutes. while you're setting the devices up here, about 50% of the exam will come from my lecture material, which is not necessarily in the book, and about 50% will come from the book directly. So I'll tell you what I have for my lectures that's particularly important. For example, one of the things that you should know that we did an exercise on the first day is how is this class different? That you were already experts in marketing before you even walked into this classroom because you've been exposed to marketing. And so you're already a marketing expert. So there's a question that says, which of the following statements about marketing is most accurate? You should get that fairly quickly and easily. That's 2 points right there that everyone should get, although some of you will insist on giving you the wrong answer. Every semester, I know about 15 people do. Your text talks about what percentages of new businesses fail within 5 years of their launch. You should know that. You should know the definition of marketing. That's the AMA definition. That's straight from the textbook, and then there's something that I add to that definition, that marketing is a pervasive social activity that you should know. You should know that marketing focuses not only on what's going on within the firm and working within the firm, but because it is the only fully integrated function of the firm, that it also involves these external factors that we have to look at. And so what are the common factors among an organization's, for example, chairmen, stockholders, suppliers, customers, laborers, and society at large? Things like they're all should be taken into consideration in ethical decision-making by companies. What does marketing seek to do? It's basically identify or discover and then satisfy needs and wants. You should know what a qualified prospect is, or a prospect, or a prospective customer. Your text talks about the idea of exchange, and you should know what this idea of exchange is and why it's fundamental to the concept of marketing. That marketing seeks to add value among all aspects of the firm, and so there's a question that says, which of the following statements is most accurate about marketing departments as they operate in the firm? The text lists 4 factors that you have to have for marketing to occur. You should know what those are. And along with those factors, what are the central concerns then of marketing? You should be able to distinguish between a strategic business unit, a department, an organization, how those are different, what levels you're going to have different types of, for example, strategies and planning. Along with that, I talked about what makes a good goal. So there's a question directly from my lecture that says a good goal contains all of the following except. Organizations can be divided into 2 types of groups. What are they? The text gives you a definition of an offering. You should know what that is. An offering. You should know the difference between equity, assets, profits. These are talked about in the text. You should be able to identify the differences between a sector and an industry. You should know how to go about developing a marketing strategy. Large organizations, along with strategy, are extremely complex and usually consist of how many levels? That's directly from the text. Your text talks about differences between chief executive officers, chief operations officers or operating officers, and chief marketing officers. You should know what those are. You should know something about each strategic business unit. So for example, we talked about 3M, how there are different units within 3M. We talked about Post-its. We talked about environmental scanning. You should know what the factors of an environmental scan are, what you need to look at. Things like economic trends, demographics, environmental, regulatory, things like that. There are a number of questions, about 4 of them, that ask you to identify which of the following, for example, is the social trend in an environmental scan, which would be an economic trend, what's a competitive example, substantive. So look at those substantive examples in the book and be able to identify the difference between a substantive example, for example, in terms of competition versus macroeconomic factors. In class, I told you that philosophy deals with 3 great questions. You should know what those are. I gave you a couple of definitions for different types of knowledge that we can know. There's knowledge which is gained through experience. Things like driving a car, you didn't know that automatically. But there is some knowledge that you can gain from rational thought. The example being things like the Pythagorean theorem. You should know, in terms of ethics, what teleological ethics is versus deontological ethics. And some of the major thinkers that I talked about, for example, Kant and categorical imperative. Which thinker is most associated with virtue ethics? There are 2 types of teleological ethical theories. The purest form is called act utilitarianism. Another form would be called rule utilitarianism. And although all of those valid ethical theories, deontological, teleological, and virtue-based ethics, are valid because they have 3 characteristics, that doesn't mean they're without criticism. And you should understand what some of those criticisms are. So for example, with teleological ethics, the fact that there are just some things that we'd say that even if it created the greatest good, maybe we shouldn't do it. We just shouldn't engage in that kind of behavior. A classic example of that would be the Tuskegee study, where our government denied certain people, particularly African American men, treatment for syphilis to see what the outcome would be. As a result, we know a lot about it. It wasn't terribly ethical. You know, maybe gotten the greatest good in terms of epidemiology. Criticism of virtue ethics, things like, what is the end of a human being? How can we determine what that is? Even if we determine what that is, can we teach the virtues? What you need to do from today in terms of conducting marketing research, what types of questions you should ask, the purpose of marketing research, what the ultimate goal is, right? Not to put the research in a desk drawer and let it sit there, but to actually take marketing action. Then there are some substantive examples that ask you about if you to ascertain certain things. For example, like grape nuts, gives you examples about that, what you should do based on the marketing research. You should know the steps according to the text. The first step, so there are 3 questions that say the first step of marketing research is, according to the text, the second step, the fourth step, what you do at specific times in those steps. So where you specify constraints, which step that is in, for example, where you make recommendations, develop findings, and then there are 3 bonus questions that you can get. So there's bonus points available. Do you all have any questions on the exam? Yes, sir. Yes. You have to bring Scantrons. It's Form 882E. If you don't bring a Scantron, I will sell one to you. They are 50 cents. And I'm not a charity, so you better have 50 cents. Yes, ma'am.
How many of those questions, like what should we focus on?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Focus on bonus questions.
Like the bonus questions, like what might we look at?
Like, what is your resume? That's one of them. No, it's all multiple guess.
No essay.
No essays. Any other questions? Yes, sir. There are 50 multiple guess questions.